Good morning, everyone. Ekaro, thank you for coming for the second day of the African Landscape Architectures Conference with an S. As we talked about yesterday, the S represents a plurality of forms of practice, and we're so grateful to have so many different forms of practice represented here at the conference. Let us begin with the land acknowledgement. The Harvard Graduate School of Design is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. The school also recognizes the work of the Harvard University Native American program in cultivating the relationships that led to the creation of this acknowledgement. So today we have two panels this morning, one on adaptabilities and another on pedagogies. Then we'll have lunch, or we have a lunch break, and a fantastic soil painting workshop with Anne Gollifer, which will take place at the Graduate School of Design. And then in the afternoon, we have a final panel on the future, futurities, with then a wrapping up session. The first panel on adaptabilities is moderated by Daniel Agbiboa, who is an associate professor of African and African American studies at Harvard, where he also serves as a faculty associate of the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, who are one of the sponsors of this event. He's an affiliate faculty of the Bloomberg Center for Cities and co-chair of the Urban Conservation Series in the Mahindra Humanities Center. He's also an executive committee member of the Harvard Center for African Studies and an advisory board member of the Harvard Mellon Urban Initiative. He has authored so many publications and books, we don't have time to go through them, but I did want to call out his acclaimed book, They Eat or Sweat, Transport, Labor, Corruption, and Everyday Survival in Urban Nigeria, which is published by Oxford University Press. So thank you, Daniel, for moderating this panel, and welcome you to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and those joining us online. It is a pleasure to be here. Just yesterday, it's amazing the power of mobility. Just yesterday, I was at an all-day event at the British Academy in London on the ecologies of Black living, which was a plurality of scholars and practitioners, from curators to academics. It seems fitting this morning then to be looking at a branch in many ways of ecology, which is landscape. And we have a wonderful, wonderful panel to help us explore some of the issues, to turn our attention from sort of the theoretical or abstract to looking at the materiality of landscapes, the creative interventions that are happening, sometimes often in the shadows, and to tease those out in conversation with each other. So our discussion will explore how landscapes and urbanscapes respond to changing conditions over time to maintain their viability. Adaptation is, of course, not just about environmental shift. It is deeply political, it is cultural, it is social, it is spatial, it is temporal. As we reflect on the African continent, home to some of the fastest growing cities in the world, we must ask, how are landscape architects shaping or being shaped by these rapid transformations? What does adaptation look like when framed through histories of empire, colonialism, political economy, community resilience, or even spatiality? To help us navigate these critical questions, we have a fantastic panel of scholars and practitioners who have their hands on the pulse of what's going on. We have Thabo Lenneiye from University of Pennsylvania, who will share insights from her work on sustainable agriculture and ecological restoration, underscoring the challenges and opportunities of coordinating research and action across borders. We have Safouan Azouzi from MIT, who will take us into the world of oases, not as isolated landscapes, but as complex interconnected networks shaped by both indigenous knowledge and modern technologies. And of course, we have our own Olatunji Adejumo from the University of Lagos. He's the gentleman who is distinguishedly dressed somewhere in the crowd there, who will challenge us to rethink the nature of value in landscape practice, how colonial legacies continue to shape adaptation strategies, and what it means to center community perspectives in design and teaching, especially with a sort of a spatial turn in mind. So together, their perspectives will reveal not just the necessity of adaptation, which we all know, but the tensions and the possibilities inherent in these processes. And I look forward, as I bet you do, to an engaging discussion. And with that, let's begin with our first speaker, Thabo Lenneiye. You have about 15 to 17 minutes remarks, and when the time is going, you just help yourself by saying, on that note. Please.
Thank you. Okay, let me see if I can manage this. I think I have someone's phone here. Is this yours? Okay. I can keep it. Here you are. All right. Good morning. Bright and early. Thank you, Gareth and the team, the organization team, for inviting me, but also for the honor of kicking off the day today. So yesterday was an amazing amount of speakers, and I'm honored to have, share the stage with some of the folks that were up here. Also, thank you to the GSD leadership and the leadership of the African Studies Department for recognizing the need for a forum such as this. Sometimes I feel like a misfit, and times like this, I feel like maybe there is a crew out there that I belong to. So I'll start there. So my name is Thabo Lenneiye, as was mentioned. I grew up in Zimbabwe, where years before going to architecture school, before I became a recovering architect, I went to a farm high school. And I learned many lessons about agriculture, ecology, and also the value of demonstration campuses for not only the students, but the communities around them. I found myself in a full circle moment at this point, where I now oversee a sustainable agriculture fund, bringing research and applied research to the policy arena. I see there's policy folks in the crowd as well, Robert. It was nice talking to you. And in his opening remarks yesterday and today, Gary talked about the pluralities of landscape architectures represented at this conference and practiced on the continent that we hold so dearly. So in this realm of what my fellow presenter, Arthur, called breaking definitions, I'll talk about a cross-section of topics in my talk today. So turning to the topic at hand, if I can get my notes to load. Sorry about that. So Africa is navigating a complex paradox. It makes minimal contribution to global climate change, yet its people are most heavily impacted by it. The UN estimates that out of the 20 most climate vulnerable countries in the world, 17 are in Africa. Further, by 2050, the population in sub-Saharan Africa is projected to double, and the rate of urbanization is set to reach 60%. Thereby increasing pressure on the region's cities and settlements. During the same time frame, the Paris Agreement calls for the world to reach net zero emissions to achieve necessary temperature targets, which increases the urgency of the global low-carbon transition. This transition relies heavily on raw materials from the African continent, where local communities disproportionately bear the burden of negative environmental impacts in what Safouan and a few other scholars term the decarbonization divide. So clearly, African cities and settlements are on the front lines of climate change. In response to this situation, African countries have to redirect a growing portion of their public finances towards mitigation efforts and the protection of their populations. And beyond mitigation, the African continent is in need of locally relevant, community-informed adaptation plans that integrate African environmental philosophies and practices. The title of today's panel is Adaptabilities, which I think sort of refers more to the landscape and the landscape's ability to respond. Today, I'll sort of sit within that hybrid of the landscape's ability to respond and human action, the policies that we enact. As mentioned by a number of presenters during yesterday's session, some of the biases in privileging outside models is not new. Throughout Africa, colonial powers both claimed that African societies harmed their environments because of lack of knowledge and skill, and threatened precious landscapes and their animal occupants. In Environmental Movements in Sub-Saharan Africa, A Political Ecology of Power and Conflict, Cyril Obi points out that there is ample evidence that before the colonial encounter with African environment, African people had a rich knowledge of their environment. In many cultures, land, water, and even forests were either deified or held in sacred trust. I think we heard a lot about the connection between spirituality and landscape yesterday. Beyond this period, we can look to historical figures across the ages and across the region. For example, Thomas Sankara, the first president in 1983 of newly independent, at the time, Upper Volta, which is now Burkina Faso. In order to combat the encroaching desert, Sankara initiated a tree planting program where 10.5 million trees were planted in 15 months. This was in the 1980s. To this day, tree planting is a part of Burkinabe culture and is often part of a day of celebration such as birthdays and weddings. Wangari Maathai, who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, the Kenyan founder of the Greenbelt Movement, and first African woman to win the Nobel Prize laureate in 2004, founded the movement in 1977, since which more than 51 million trees have been planted, and more than 30,000 women have been trained in forestry, food processing, beekeeping, and other trades that help them earn an income. Lastly, on the my extreme right, Zephaniah Phiri. Less known, he's a pioneer of what is known as water harvesting and is the founder of the Jushavane Water Project in Zimbabwe. He sought not only to prevent soil erosion, but to harvest and plant the water that fell as rain or surface runoff on his land, a precious resource for growing. Looking for what he called a poor man's method that would be useful to himself and the other small farmers in the community, he experimented with various ways of capturing water, methods that are still practiced today. So beyond these figures, authors and academics have explored these topics. I won't go into every single one of them. Some include James McMahon and Richard Grove. And the one thing I want to talk about is that in McCann's book, Greenland, Brownland, Blackland, using examples such as Aksum in Ethiopia and the extensive waterways that were dredged by the population there, he advocates for what he calls environmental possibilism, different from determinism. Environmental conditions will influence human activities, but humans also actively shape their environment through choices. He argues that this is something that's a big sort of part of African history. Next, I want to point out Paul Katembo Vikanza in his analysis of Virunga National Park, the oldest national park in Africa, which came about less than half a decade after Yellowstone, the first national park in the world, talks about the contemporary evolution and demonstrate that as regards sustainability, conservation, and development need to become interconnected. People matter. We need to take care of the environment and people. There seems to be serious consensus, or some consensus, about the integration of local knowledge into some of these adaptation plans. But however, according to the Global Center on Adaptation, Africa faces a serious and urgent shortfall in funding for climate adaptation. And while capital is the end goal, the top reason provided is that capacity constraints within African countries limits the access to adaptation finance, including significant technical and institutional capacity required to build project pipelines and generate proposals to climate funds. With this in mind, the key question that we have been exploring is whether research and academic institutions can play a role in helping to solve this, and in particular, regional and local research and academic institutions. To frame this discourse and the case studies I'll share in the limited amount of time that I have left, I'm still watching the clock, we turn to a 2016 article focused on bridging the science action gap to better inform adaptation policies and practices across Africa by Richard Cockburn and team from Durban, South Africa. They highlight the importance of three things. Number one, co-production of solutions and fostering a strong relationship between scientific knowledge and local knowledge. Number two, collaborative partnerships between research institutions, policymakers, local practitioners, and communities. And thirdly, knowledge capture, building collaborative capacity, and social capital through case study development and dissemination. In each of the case studies, the core collaborators include local community, research and academic institutional partners, and local regional planning authorities. So first I'll turn to Zimbabwe, where we focused on policy recommendations for a wetland conservation strategy. This is an aerial view of Harare. The earliest city was cited on a copy, which is Afrikaans name for a rock, for defense and strategic purposes. So you can imagine that water became a scarce resource. And like the copy, the bedrock of the city is quite literally hard rock or granite. And this is one of the beautiful rock formations that you see in Zimbabwe. Similar to the other cases, we worked closely with our local university partner, which was National University of Science and Technology, and in this case, the Office of the Mayor of Harare, to conduct extensive community engagement, workshops, and discussions. The goal was to capture in the eyes of the community not only the challenges of the city, but also assess the assets and the dreams and aspirations. As one of my fellow presenters from KDI yesterday, Chalani, mentioned, so eloquently put it, the key with community engagement is to keep going back again and again and move at the speed of trust. Only then can you start to unearth the real challenges and the real opportunities. So we coupled this with a mapping of the extensive wetlands in Harare. At the time, the network was already starting to see a large amount of encroachment, and combined this with data about water distribution and management and formal and informal population estimates, which revealed that 1 out of 5 residents did not have access to a clean supply of water. A situation that was worsening with informal growth. This image is an aerial view of land centered on a wetland called Hopley Farm. The land is unsettled, as you can see in 2005, and completely occupied with thousands of informal residents 3 years later. Rapid population growth exacerbated the multi-pronged health, water, and environmental issues, which led to a discussion and a co-creation of a multi-pronged health, water, and environmental policy approach. Alongside the community members and mayor's office, we took a group of students to do a studio, and what we focused on was bringing a group of University of Pennsylvania students to work alongside, hand in hand, with the local university, National University of Science and Technology, students partnering with other students to co-create a number of proposed pilots, including this one, which leverages a communal water point as a public space and buffer against further encroachment on the wetland. The value of having the local students is undeniable. Some of them actually lived in the communities that we were working in. Mapping visualization of the key challenges, along with the generation of proposals, was then presented by the mayor's office and local members of parliament as a national priority for incorporation into policy and adaptation plans going forward. I'll quickly move forward. The next case takes us northeast to Lake Victoria, the Lake Victoria Basin, where our local university partner, Great Lakes University, has a foundation and history and community engaged work. This is the project that Gary invited me to talk about. Sorry, Gary, I expanded the scope a little bit. In addition to the governor of Kisumu and Siaya, the regional authority, the Lake Basin Authority, has set out plans in their 4th strategic plan to become a regional center of excellence in environment. In this case, the question of research and academic institutional involvement to support the capacity is already laid out in their plans. They already understand the need to engage with these institutions. And so together with our local partner, GLUC, Great Lakes University, we're exploring the development of a regional community of practice, knitting together the different institutions in the region and hopefully eventually becoming invisible ourselves and not necessarily the driver of this. Lake Victoria, I'll just talk a little bit about it, is the 2nd largest freshwater lake in the world. This gives you a sense of where it sits size-wise between Lake Superior and Lake Huron. It also provides the headwaters to the White Nile, meaning it's one of the main feeders of the River Nile. It is also one of the most biodiverse regions. I'm not pressing this button hard enough, am I? One of the most biodiverse regions in the world, with Kenya and Tanzania ranking in the top 25 of the world's most biodiverse countries. The population of the Lake Basin spanning 5 East African countries, is over 190 million people, and it is one of the fastest growing regions in the world population-wise. On the ground, we heard from local experts, including former World Bank regional and country directors and specialists in regenerative agriculture and aquaculture, along with community engagement workshops. Similar challenges emerged. This is a picture of one of the informal settlements in Kisumu, one of the cities that faces the lake. One of the biggest challenges around settlements was limited infrastructure and lacking much needed landscape interventions to buffer against intense storms and flooding. Other ecological challenges came to the fore, including the challenges of lake level rise. The fourth image is what's left of a roof structure of a restaurant, which had been built only one season before. Less than 2 years later, it was completely submerged. However, there are also many assets in the area, including the sustainable fisheries and market, the burgeoning biofuel projects, and the Dunga swamp. Dunga was an example of a low-impact intervention of a number of paths through the wetland and a lookout point to preserve the local bird population. The community members learned how to be tour guides, and the benefit ensured that they could remain custodians of the habitat. They pushed us to ensure that this was included in the adaptation plans and the strategy and the policies going forward, projects like this. Similarly, a biofuel project started by one of the community members powered the fish market using waste products, complete circular system that existed there and started by the community itself. So in true design fashion, we carried out another studio. We brought in a group of Penn students, and this time they worked alongside the Great Lakes University of Kisumu to map and codify information and generate a proposed approach at the micro scale of Kisumu that could be tested by the regional authority at different scales for a relationship from the lakefront to the city through to the periphery. Following this engagement, the neighboring county Siaya invited us to provide alternatives to a World Bank-funded project that they were working on. In the third phase of this work, we've begun mapping research and pilot projects undertaken throughout the Lake Basin, with almost 2,000 identified so far. This map shows the beginnings of that, and our early findings indicate greater opportunity for coordination across the various research and academic institutions for policy integration into the adaptation plans. The opportunity of many evidence-based pilot projects already exists here, and the question is, how do we connect those, and how do we connect with the Basin Authority? In my last 28 seconds, I'll just touch on one project that's a little bit adjacent to the landscape space. This is mapping regenerative agriculture in 3 countries, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Ethiopia. Again, with policy aims, and in this case, the goal of piloting through university demonstration farms, another full circle moment. So we're working with research partners and institutions across 3 countries, the ones that I mentioned, and on-the-ground partners in the Lake Basin as well. It goes without saying that traditional farmers have long been adapting to changing conditions. The UN identified over 400 examples of indigenous peoples' contribution to climate change monitoring. The different researchers that we're working with have identified key practices in their respective countries, and the overlaps fall into familiar categories of no-till farming, agroforestry, crop rotation, to name a few. The adaptations and differences are quite interesting, where the findings so far show that Ethiopia focuses heavily on integrated farming systems adapted to diverse agroecological zones, from highlands to arid regions, while Kenya has a strong emphasis on organic fertilizers and biochar, the promotion of things such as black soldier fly frass and vermicomposting. They're also the one that is furthest along in integrating these into economic models. Lastly, Zimbabwe integrates soil conservation practices into farming, particularly through methods like shown here, called Pumudza, which is an integration of climate-smart and conventional practices with the goal of reducing the plot size. So one of the biggest challenges is the sprawl of agricultural land, and reducing those is one of the success stories of this. In my last slide, before I get a hook on that note, the next steps of the project ladder up to the development of a framework for university demonstration farm based on traditional farmer field schools. This is a new information. This is sort of a readoption of this information, but focused on regenerative agriculture models, where the university can shoulder the associated risks and also disseminate the practices to the surrounding community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for not pulling me off the stage.
Absolutely. What a brilliant presentation that really underscores the value of co-produced knowledge, partnerships, university, community, and we'll have time to sort of delve into the rich materials that you've presented. But for now, let's turn our attention to Safouan Azouzi, who will present on Oasis.
So hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Gareth, for inviting me to this unique seminar. So conferences like this one, considering the African perspective, are actually quite unusual. So my research focuses on the relationship between design and commoning, and I try to look at it from a decolonial perspective. Initially, I'm a product designer, and 5 years ago, my PhD started with a simple question: what design in the Anthropocene? Actually, it wasn't simple at all, because the real question was quite complex. How can designers engage in creating alternative economies and help in shifting paradigms from extractivist economies, growth economies, to a resource one, and where design is attached to situations rather than objects or products. So why Oasis? I'm pushing this one. So I use Oasis as metaphors of collapse and resistance, sustainability and resilience, commoning and community economies, and finally connectivity and relationality. And I'd like you to keep these 4 key points in mind throughout the presentation. So I focus on the context of Tunisia, my home country. Its name was Africa Proconsularis, a Roman province covering today's Tunisia and roughly parts of Algeria and Libya. The Romans called it after the local Afri people, and the name eventually extended to the entire continent. By 2050, the IPCC says that temperature will increase by 5 degrees Celsius. So practically speaking, it means 60 degrees Celsius on the ground, around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And they predict also 50% less rainfall. And it's not just a future scenario, it's already happening. I was in Nefzawa region in the south, here, in 2021, and it was actually terrible. We were basically just baking. It even reached 57 degrees Celsius. So we had like big heat waves that lasted for 3 weeks. And here you can see the land covers vulnerability to change by 2050 due to climate change, but mostly it's driven by human activity. Clearly, Oasis face many challenges, but they are primarily linked to socioeconomic changes. Climate change definitely plays a role in the situation, but like I said, it's essentially linked to modern agricultural practices and modern housing. It depends. Actually, in Gafsa, Oasis is due to phosphate extractivism. That same phosphate is transported to Gebes coastal oasis, that's my hometown, where that phosphate is transformed into chemical fertilizers to be exported to Europe. And if it's not chemical industries, then it's tourism in the Jrid region. And if it's not tourism, then it's heavy water-intensive export-led agro-industry. So Tunisia is the fourth or fifth, depends of the year, biggest exporter of date in the world. And it's almost like 10% of the global exports. And here you can see Nefzawa region in 1984, 1999, and 2020. So we're actually greening the desert. But the water table is going down by 3 to 5 meters every year. And it's linked to what is, so it's linked to illicit drillings. We went from 4,600 illicit drillings in 2004 to around 21,000 illicit drillings in 2021. And around 80% of the national production comes from these unrecognized illicit extensions. So this is Tunisia's largest illicit agricultural use of groundwater. And these extensions are not recognized by the central authority, but ironically, the state does not, still benefits from exporting the production. And I tend to consider these illicit extensions as the small farmers' extreme response to water dispossession processes and from large landowners and state interventionism. And now public authorities are torn between short-term socio-economic needs and medium-long-term ecological concerns. And so in Nefzawa, competition for water and land intensifies, and we passed from water commoning to a race for water. You can see that they use gas oil to pump water, and if you are wealthier, you invest into solar panels to pump more water at what they call the peak hour at noon, actually, which is quite absurd. And this is the amount of water that's going to the salt lakes. And here you can see the monoculture. It's an infinite sea of palm trees. And I was initially interested in Jemna Oasis, which is labeled the Oasis of the Revolution. I chose the context of Jemna because there was an experiment around land commoning during the revolution. They took back what they consider their ancestral land. They were dispossessed from this land during French colonization and also after independence. So in 2011, they took back the land, and this participatory democracy experiment gave birth to the new law on social solidarity economy in Tunisia. But still, they're facing legal issues, and it's still an experiment and never really became a project. And my doubt is that the central state didn't want this commoning experiment to go all around the region of Nefzawa. And I was also interested in my hometown, Gebes, which is known for its pollution due to the production of phosphates, like I said. And the state-owned phosphate company, Groupe Chimique Tunisien, employs thousands of people, and each step of the production chain is responsible for environmental and health damage. So air, soil, water are contaminated, and the group is dumping around 13,000 tons of phosphogypsum every day in the sea. And it's essentially pumping huge quantities of water, and basically the oasis is dying. Here you can see the phosphogypsum. And what I tried to do there is to gather the local activists and the municipality farmers, artisans, women, men, elders, and youngsters during 2 months of ethnography around the idea of a future workshop where we could think about the future of the oasis through the lens of commons and community economies. And I wasn't reinventing and nothing for them because they know what commons and commoning are. And we ended up with different scenarios. One of them is this, the one I want to talk about is the smart oasis scenario. Eventually, after my passage in there, the locals created the national collective of the oasis of Gebes. And the goal is to register the oasis as part of the UNESCO intangible heritage. So it's all about the pantry and the what we call oasis effect. So oasis, like I said, are or were perfect examples of sustainability and resilience. They are famous for their cool microclimate and what we call oasis effect. And they can also inform us on good practices related to agriculture, but also dwelling. So the three-layered agriculture creates a microclimate, and locals talk about the moisture. So they choose the word thra, richness, to describe moisture. They could have chosen another word in Arabic, which is nede or nadwa for moisture, but they choose the word richness, which is quite interesting. You can see the green lush. And traditional oasis, we saw it yesterday with different materials like mud and earth and adobe. Today, we have ill-suited houses using AC, balconies, and having big glass windows, so we consume more electricity, and there are frequent water cuts in the region. But traditionally, the oasis settlement, the Gsur, Gsar means castle or fort. It uses adobe and earth, and they have terraces which extend forward, covering narrow streets, which are inserted in a tunnel in the built-up area. And houses have central courtyards, so they always have shadow and passive cooling. This is in Algeria, in Ghardeia. And we have different typologies of oasis. So third, like I said, commons were fundamentally a tradition in oasis, and for millennia, people have adopted a complex social organization based on solidarity and commoning around water and beyond. So we have Wadi Oasis, the B, which is essentially a dry river from when the Sahara was green. The village and the oasis are located on the banks of this ancient river, and this is the most common typology, where communities build drains and dams to capture flows of the wadi. We also have depression oasis. Most Nefzawa's oasis are depression oasis, and the village is below sea level on a shore of a shot or sebkha, so a salt lake. And water is collected by intercepting underground microflows. And we also have the Arg oasis, the dune oasis. Arg means vein. That's the word we use for dunes. And the water table is sufficiently shallow, which allows the excavation of a sort of crater or basin called root, plural ritan, and palm trees are just directly planted in there. And the most famous technique is the one linked to Piedmont oasis or mountain oasis. So the communities collect water by an artificial underground drainage gallery called Fogara. We saw it yesterday. In Morocco, they called Khattara. In Algeria, they called Fogara. In Tunisia, we called Kharriga. In Iran, they call it qanet, but it's essentially the same thing. So you can see these specific landscapes. It's beautiful. This is in Algeria, in Oued Souf. This is the Foggara system. This is the output of the Foggara system. So it's essentially divided on by a central figure that is the water chief or water master. This is it. So this is the trusted person to divide equally the water. It was, because we no longer have these figures in many of the Tunisian oases. And so the thing is, we shouldn't be also nostalgic about the past, and we should avoid essentialism, because like oases weren't fully egalitarian, because slave was actually an essential part of their economy. But speaking of trade and relationality, the fourth point is that the one of oasis connectivity. So whenever we think about the Sahara, we tend to think of it as a borderland, a region to cross, a space that is divided by 10 different countries. It's actually, this is more evocative for me about the Sahara. And here I will talk about the concept of archipelagic thinking of Edouard Glissant and nomad thought introduced by Deleuze and Guattari, who introduced this idea of relational fluid approach to cultural identity and speciality, which is particularly relevant in the context of oasis and the Sahara. So here you can see the pre-colonial, pre-Islamic, networks that were further developed during the Islamic period. And you can see in red root oasis, so it's not only about water, but also roots, which is strategic. And today, irregular migrants and smugglers use exactly the same routes. In oasis, the colonial era established private property predominance and altered water extraction methods. And the Sahara, like I said, was an integral part of the oasis system. And the problem is that French colonizers saw the Sahara as essentially a place to be pacified. They talk about the pacification of the Sahara. And what they wanted is to fix these nomad autonomous populations because they resisted for. So the invasion of Algeria took 100 years, essentially because of these communities in the Sahara resisting the French colonization. And Jules Verne wrote a book called The Invasion of the Sea. Jules Verne talks about this. He initially entitled his book The Saharan Sea, and in 1880s, Commander François-Élie Rouder proposed flooding part of the Sahara Desert with waters from the Mediterranean by digging a canal from the Gulf of Gabes to the Chott El Djerid, and to have these mega lakes project. And this was part of a Western perception of oasis as a quiet, self-sufficient, idyllic places of relaxation and easy living. But these were the premises for the commodification of the oasis landscapes for tourism. So projects led by the FAO, World Bank, or other big development agencies and the state tend to focus on the dichotomies between traditional oasis versus modern oasis. Here you can see the traditional oasis in Afzawa. These are the modern oasis with these dead old ziras, old oasis. And I think we should go beyond these dichotomies. You can see the modern ones and the traditional ones, because I think it perpetuates the same colonial narratives. And it reminds me of the Medina of Tunis, organic Medina of Tunis, right next to the colonial French city. So I think we should go beyond preservationist and Orientalist approaches to oasis, this idea of mummification of the traditional oasis, because what is traditional? Is it the 3 layers oasis effect? Is it the water gathering techniques? Is it, yeah, is it the community economies? And Battisti proposes, I'm almost done. Battisti proposes the notion of socio-ecological landscapes. Here you can see that Nefzawa is becoming one big oasis of 38,000 hectares, actually. And he says that oasis should be considered as socio-ecological landscape. It's both a combination of the settlement, either it's a old village or a modern town, with the palm grove, either it's a traditional oasis or a monocultural modern palm grove. And if we think about this, then all of Egypt is one big oasis. Sorry. Yeah. Just wanted to show the final photos, trying to think about these smart oases, try to develop with Midjourney.
I think we'll have the Q&A as well.
Yeah.
To show some
And thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Safouan, and my head is just spinning with so many questions, connections between you and Thabo. But let's turn our attention to Tunji to present. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the organizers of Gareth, Doherty, and the team at GSD. I want to thank International Federation of Landscape Architects, their partner, that got me here, and I saw what was here, and it's a two things together. And I wonder why, I was wondering exactly why do they make this thing extremely theoretical for me, because I got a letter from Sarah that wants me to discuss the issue of cultural groups, and including colonial encounters in shaping the landscape of Africa. So I got it, I was excited. I said, well, why do we have to go extremely theoretical? Later on, I got to understand that again, I must finish this one up based upon a project going on in the Gulf of Guinea. We should understand that landscape architecture has a reputation of having a lot of disciplines coming together. And coming up with a term like adaptability and adaptation, they're not the same thing. They differ in a little way. Often we rely upon urban anthropology to think and help us to think highly. So I will look at adaptability from the perspective of landscape architecture as demanded by what I have with me. And I will relate it to how the colonial era was able to adapt to adapt to African landscape over time, because the same landscape has supported many cultures, many over 2,000-3,000 years. Each person come up with his own idea, and that's why I say landscape is to me a canvas of civilization. In other words, you and me, we are artists. And in this canvas, we just come over time and space to put idea exactly what we want on time and space. But again, I will comment with the fact that if landscape is a canvas of civilization, then civilization is driven by a thought pattern. All right? Then we will look at the issue that adaptability itself it comes from different disciplines that we have known over time. But adaptability in landscape architecture is just evolving. And I will relate to it that it's a thinking process, sympathetic to the contextual ecological process towards a desired cultural changes. Changes is the issue. The thinking process is the philosophy that is required. And in other words, if we must understand how landscape adaptability looks like over time and space, then we must understand the basic philosophy that drives it. And that's why the first case study is talking about colonialism in sub-Saharan Africa. That's what I have with me here. And it was driven by a simple colonial input that happened in 1884. All right, saying that this continent has some resources that must be the global north must come up with. And you see, for Africans, landscape is not landscape is numinous, it's spiritual, but for the colonial masters, landscape is a pool of resources. Two different approach. It's a clash of civilization. One civilization says landscape is what we have. It's about the people that were there before, that are there now, and that will be there tomorrow. The other civilization say, all I care about is the resources. I must harvest it via death, via war, via anything. And that's what it's still going on. It has not changed. The case in Congo is there. And that is what we are supposed to look on. How do we do? I was wondering, again, why will Sarah and the team decide this? Are they thinking about 2063 African agenda? Are they saying, how do we produce a new generation of landscape consultants, landscape architects towards that agenda? I don't know, but that is what I believe. But again, if you want to look at the issue of colonial landscape in architecture, it came via Cartesian paradigm. It's very simple. Cartesian philosophy is saying you and us, human being and every member of the ecosystem. We are superior. We're just animals. We use you any way we want. We are white, you are black. It's a lot of conquest. When I conquer you, I decimate you. I tell you, you're only good for what I want you for. And that is the issue that we have here. And it did not come, it came through a broad philosophy. For Nigeria, it's Cartesian paradigm. For Australia, it's a terra nullius, a no man's land. So I will operate within Nigeria. We maybe talk other sub-Saharan African country. I'll be a little bit quiet about South Africa. I was discussing with yesterday because Mr. Trump is interested there now. We do not know what to think about. As again, he's interested in Finland and Panama. But again, we wait on this place. And so a part of the Immanuel Kant's idea is that they must use Euro-localism to civilize global South. And the global South is based upon biocentric thinking. Whereas Euro-localism, that became Euro-American localism in 1915, when America came on board, all right, is saying what we need is your resources. But again, we have a new member on the team now, which is the Sino-African thing, the Chinese. They use a philosophy called Angola model. You want money? We give you money. You default, we own your land. It's as simple as that. That is Angola model, 2006. And so we start wondering, how did they apply this one to the landscape? Because we are talking about adaptability in landscape architecture. Whereas for sub-Saharan Africa, it's about the people in Africa is about centric philosophy. You know, it's a spiritscape. I put it that way. Whereas the other one in global north is a resourcescape. Two conflicting ideas. One is about spirit. One is about taking. Yesterday we saw what happened when Princess Adejumo was presenting the issue at Oshunoshubu. And the other one is saying, no, it's your resources. And when this resources is exploited, they leave the land barren. That is the case with a young woman carrying her baby through oil spillage. Nobody came to clean it up. And we have hundreds and hundreds of them in Nigeria. Currently, the worst one is what I call the landscape of battery, lithium, cobalt, californium, tourmaline, and uranium. And when they take it, the landscape is left empty. Nobody to take care. And I wonder, that is why they wonder, we will be the next few 25, 30 years, looking for people that will bring it back. Because this landscape of mining, it leads to a landscape of hunger. Nowhere to cultivate. If we now want to feed people, then we must go back and look for a formula on how to, on a framework on how to bring it productive. That is where it is. So, I'm running through that is the issue very well. And so we try to look at these, the eras we're talking about here. That is the organic for the pre-colonial era, and the era between 1861 and 1914 is a produce era. After the slave trade, it's now say, okay, what else do we have to harvest and take over? They brought in cocoa, and like Richard Quest says, how do you produce cocoa if you do not eat chocolate? It's crisis we have at the end. So we have this thing reflected even after post-independence in what Gareth Doherty studied some time ago about Mandela Park at Osogbo and Osun Osogbo Grove, two spaces with conflicting interests. One was designed upon Euro-American localism, that is Mandela. The other one is an existing intuitive design. Mandela Park, nobody uses it throughout the year. And a whole lot of money was invested there. And the other one, people use it every day. We saw it yesterday. Question then, what went wrong? It's a matter of values. All right. So adaptability then is a design character. We should be able to say, what character do we want? It's a design strategy that sees particular cultural landscape as a progressive, creative work amenable to desired functional, technological belief system and aesthetic dictates. Adaptability in landscape architecture then demands chameleon design and planning principles. In other words, if we want to adapt a particular landscape to a particular philosophy for a group of people, then we must learn from chameleon. And the chameleon approach is very simple. That is it. Chameleon do not destroy the ecosystem. It doesn't affect everything. It stays there on its own. Chameleon change color without changing ecosystem process. Chameleon is not coming to extract gold and destroy everything, including the human being, so as to extract it back to global north. A chameleon is saying, I will change color to communicate with other chameleons. In other words, if there is a change, I will bring in other parts of the world that have the capacity to benefit from what I have. Chameleon is saying, change color to relate with temperate seasonality in the ecosystem. In other words, yes, there will be climate changes. It was before in the past. Last year, Sahara started getting green, a lot of flooding in Sahara. Everyone were happy that maybe things are changing after about 2,000 years. And we saw the flood, and we are expecting more flood this year. And if that's the case, that means Sahara is about going back to what it was about 1,500, 2,000 years ago. Well, that's what he's saying. Climate change will come. We must live with it. And that's going to be what I will speak last. Finally, chameleon is saying, I don't have to destroy all the animals in the ecosystem. Quietly, I will stay where I am. And when the animal that I want to eat, I'll pick it and eat it. So it's live and let live. It's not live and let die. For global north, it's live and let die. You die anyhow. Either you die of lead poison in Samara in Nigeria, or you die of uranium poison in Burkina Faso, or you die by war. That's where it is. So I said our adaptability should look via that. I'm pressing this thing with all the force I have. So, I don't know. But again, I look at it. The quest for change is not new. It started from United Nations. They met in 2007 saying that every nation now has to go back and every nation has to go back and now fashion on how to run its environment. That was first one. That was 2007. In 2000, in African nations gathered together, using the mouth of the minister of Ghana, saying sustainability will be meaningless in Africa unless we get down and do it the way you used to do it, bringing in mind the current issue. And then Nigeria came on board and said that we need a new philosophy of life, and people should come out and do it, and see what they can do to sort this out. Then professionals that had job to do it in Africa, I started with late Vanessa Watson in Cape Town, who came down saying that it cannot work because Africans rely too much upon a global ideology that they know little or nothing about. All right? Are you saying I have 2 minutes left? Well, I don't know. I have to jump about 20 slides then. So, just on that note. So, again, this thing is not pressing again. I don't have to jump now. So, what we are saying here is that if that is the case, we should look at what we should do. And for us, we sat down between 2010 and 2022 in Architecture and Urbanism Research Hub. What philosophy must we use if there's a desire? We realize we cannot have one philosophy for the entire Africa. Every nation has to come with their own. And even within a nation, in Nigeria, for example, we have almost 212 ethnic groups. So we block it out. So the only way out is for designer, wherever they are coming from, to come with the idea that the idea of universal planning cannot work anymore. What we do is pure reversal. Many localisms from different parts of the world. And we came up with the idea that if we look at through the window of meta-narrative, we should be able to come up with what is required for each thing. So we came up with, we came up with what we call energy local design and planning philosophy. That if we use that one for the Yoruba nation in southwestern part of Nigeria, 50 million people, maybe we can look at the algorithm. An algorithm is not new. We came up with it and we look at what is there. That is what they have been using in the Abatik. It's about 4, 8, and 16. 4 is earth. Well, of course, we know the entire thing. 8 is wind. 20 is water. And we say, if we look at what they are using, why are they using 4, 8, and 16? Then 32 and 64, 64 and 128, 28 and 512. We'll be able to know exactly what do we do. Now, can we apply this thing into the public realm? And so we look at, if we fiddle with the art, the urban artifact, and everything in the public realm, we'll be able to create a public space that have a meaning to the people. And we came up with this simple framework that we can develop into an algorithm or space in order to go back to what we have. Because there's a difference between decolonization and decoloniality. Nigeria was decolonized in 1960, but we're not decolonized. There was no decoloniality. In other words, there's little we can do. And so we do the same thing, and we could not continue now because of Daniel is harassing me, blinking here, and I still have some seconds. Don't you rush me now. All right? So we look at the project we are doing currently in the west coast of Africa. 2,400 kilometers of the coastline. And we look for Nigeria in particular and say, okay, if we understand how local people think via citizen science, we will not rely solely on science and to look at what they have. And we came up with quite a number of adaptable issues here. I would not be able to explain them because it's on my neck. So what we are saying is that if we want to regenerate if we are looking for things to do, we need to, we need to again sit down there. If we are looking, when we are getting the communique for this particular project, we must understand that landscape architecture curriculum in sub-Saharan Africa must be rooted in the philosophy that makes the people, not in Cartesian philosophy. Everything we'll be saying is meaningless because philosophy drives the culture of a people. Landscape then is a canvas of civilization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tunji, and thank you to all our presenters. So can I invite all of you all to the stage, Safouan, Thabo, Tunji, for some discussion. I'll ask a couple of questions, and then I'll open it up to the audience.
But you have to
It's a surplus, please.
Now,
Yes.
I will go this way.
Okay, so I think I'll start from Tunji's presentation to shape some question I want to ask. So Tunji's provocation comes from a sort of a philosophical backdrop, inviting us to think about meaning. And I think a very powerful slide that I thought about was when I was thinking about the contrast between Nigeria and South Africa. And that was really powerful. For whom is this space made for, and what are the intentions that go into the making of it? And I wanted to use that sort of invitation for us to question the agenda, for us to question meaning, to ask, to sort of pick on something that Safouan mentioned briefly when he said, you know, we need to go beyond Orientalist, we need to go beyond colonial approaches, and to ask you, Thabo, if we're thinking with Tunji's critique of this binarization, this dualism, and we're thinking about Safouan's invitation to go beyond, let's take that provocation then to your work that brings students from, that is about partnerships, right? Co-produced knowledge. And you mentioned something really striking when you said, we want to become over time invisible and let the local drive these processes. How do you reflect on the process of what Tunji and Safouan are saying about the colonial, their critique of it? And do you think in any way that there's some tension in the role of the university in the global north going to co-produce knowledge with what is happening in the global south? And is that a pathway forward to the kind of project? So reflecting a little bit about, is there a danger that we reproduce what we critique? And is this the most productive in light of what Tunji and Thabo are saying there? And to then come to Thabo's fascinating, Safouan's fascinating presentation on the oasis as a metaphor. And something that struck me, and thinking now with Thabo, was the informality. She mentioned a lot of informality, informal citizens, informal settlements, and then you use the word illicit. It comes out very strikingly. And something that I wanted to engage a little bit more is, what is driving this illicit extension? And I think you sort of touch a little bit about it, but to reflect, to think these landscapes with the political a little bit, and to bring the political in conversation with the illicit. Because what we are seeing is something that is maybe illegal, but socially legitimate. People are engaging with it as a source of survival. They have to do it. So how do we sort of reconcile or engage with these two, the role of the illicit in relation to the political? And then Tunji's sort of critique of this Cartesian thinking, this cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, kind of mentality. And this turn towards what Chinua Achebe calls Africa is people. The need to think about the people in these spaces. Is there, Tunji, here a danger of reproducing this dualism, of not thinking about what is actually going on within the continent and in terms of the politics of it, and how that has actually been very essential to not necessarily killing people, but letting them die in a sense. So again, reflecting on the ways in which sometimes our leaders instrumentalize this discourse of binaries to say, we are not like that, we are not like that, but in fact are reproducing these sort of narratives at the local level, but it's a convenient narrative for them. So I'm thinking about the ways in which some of these, they are the ones bringing it in here, and we are not the ones doing it, can be instrumentalized by these leaders themselves. So those are some sort of reflections. I hope it's not too dense for you, but be a chameleon, as Tunji invited you to be. Take just what is enough, not too much. Okay, over to you.
Oh, I'm first?
Yes.
Is it on now? Very easy questions, Daniel. Not cerebral at all. So maybe I'll start with sort of your question about the danger of recreating some of the same issues and this idea of the binary critique that we heard from a few of the presentations. I'll start by saying that I grew up in Africa. I'm half Zimbabwean, half Kenyan. I drink tea in the morning every day. That's not something that my ancestors did in the times past, but it's something that came as part of sort of the English colonial heritage that we inherited. So I think I'll start by sort of critiquing this idea of binary, that I'm not sure that that actually exists anymore, that we sort of, as modern Africans, one of the speakers yesterday brought this up, that we like to think of a fixed idea of what it is to be African, but Africans are evolving. My family lives in Zimbabwe and Kenya. Every time I go there, they know more technology than I know. A lot of times their lives move faster in certain ways than mine does. And so I don't think that it's a stagnant or static idea. I brought up this idea of possibilism in my talk that I think it was Richard Grove talks about this idea that beyond environmental determinism, there's this reciprocity, that the environment has an effect on us as much as we do on it, and therefore that loop continues. And I think the same goes with sort of the colonial narratives, right? That some of this becomes a way in which we are sort of shifting over time. I like the idea of the plurality, I can never sort of say it correctly, of narratives as well, because I think one of the things that emerges is that there are many different ways that we can approach this, right? So going back to sort of answering your question and trying to make it a little bit more straightforward so I can actually answer your question, I think in terms of sort of the nuts and bolts of it, it is problematic. There is a danger in recreating things as we go back, right? As we sort of engage with universities on the ground and they look to sort of the narratives and the pedagogies and the ways that we work in planning in the global north. I studied in the global north, and this is the methodologies I've learned. And so the challenge then, I guess, we are always facing is how do we provide a level of inquiry and a space for dialogue in which our counterparts can interact and engage and push back on some of the things that we are proposing and some of the ideas that we're bringing to the table, which is why we always partner with a local university. That works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. And so the truth of the matter is that it's not a straightforward answer. The other thing I'll add to this is that a lot of times it's an economic question, right? Like, part of the reason we are the ones going and starting these conversations and ultimately want to be invisible, even if we're starting visible, is because we can bring resources and we can bring capacity. We can bring sort of the things that will actually create those communities of practice and bring people together. And so we can't sort of shy away from the fact that that seed and sometimes that sort of impetus is needed on the ground in order to get things going. Ultimately, the goal is sort of local empowerment and to get people, to sort of inhabit the spaces that we're creating. But that always is a question. How do you sort of transfer those resources? How do you ensure that the capacity is there on the ground? I think that, Tunji talked about this a little bit in terms of sort of landscapes of extraction, right? Like this is one of the things that we are always cognizant of. How do we sort of approach this in a way that isn't extractive? Whether we're successful all the time, is sort of for history, for posterity to decide. Yeah.
Thank you. Wonderful.
So I want to also like connect to what Thabo was saying about creating these empowerment spaces. So it's like my whole goal was to be a kind of support to a struggle that already is in there. So Arturo Escobar talks about design as a political tool, so designers could play a political role into supporting the struggles of subaltern communities, defending their livelihoods, what Martinez Alier calls environmentalism of the poor. That's what Jemna Gebes, Gafsa, and Oloyas are communities in Africa are fighting for their livelihoods. So that's, and the illicit extensions, as I said, is an extreme response to state interventionism and water and land dispossession processes. And the same guy who's digging that well, illicit well, has also a plot in a state-led initiative, and also has an ancestral land inherited from his grandfather in a traditional oasis. So it's the same guy. So these dichotomies between traditional versus modern, with bad guys versus good guys, it's the same guy. So this is the crazy situation. And what I tried to do there, and I couldn't because of COVID in Nefzawa, activists called me actually in all the localities to do this future workshop and to gather these researchers from the Institute for Arid Regions with officials from the Ministry of Environment and Agriculture, municipality, activists that wouldn't gather together. And I think it's about how we can go from revendication and diagnosis to prefiguration, and how can we think about design as a tool for political prefiguration. Like how can we do share communal visions of the future through the lens of commoning and through the lens of connectivity. And that's why I use oasis as a metaphor, because that's what it is. I think we can extrapolate frameworks for larger urban areas around the MENA region also. And yeah, I couldn't show the AI stuff I wanted about the smart oasis. So it's about the idea that we developed with the local community was to combine low-tech solutions around commoning and earth building, etc., with high-tech precision agriculture solutions, Internet of Things, and other. So it's not, we're not for degrowth and against technology. It's how we can use them both as a tool, as a means, and have a philosophy like Tunji talks about.
Yeah, absolutely. And very quickly.
Very quickly. Thank you. Again, I want to say that there is no landscape architect that want to do a job and they come back 10 years ago or 10 years after and see that his design is not working. You get worried. You do a park, whether you are operating on a garden scale, on a landscape design or a landscape planning scale, and you realize everything you have profiled, people are not using it. And the people who are using it is only 5%. And that's the crisis in Africa. 10% of the population of each country operate on Euro-American localism. You say you do not believe and you are designing to meet their needs. What about the remaining 90% of the people? And that's why we're saying, for you to do a design or a planning that is relevant to the people, you must operate within the concept of what the people is. And this concept must be rooted in the philosophy that they are used to. If Ebenezer Howard, somebody showed yesterday, form follow function version of Mr. Corbusier and tropical modernism that came via Corbusier and the team. 3 of them are the tools of coloniality, and it's not meant to solve the problem of 90% of the people, only 10% of the people. And you're telling me you do not believe in dualism? That means you will be solving the problem of people who have been raised over time and space to continue with neocolonialism. And to remove that, to give other people a chance, we need a new thought pattern that accommodates the needs of the people. Everybody, one way or the other, male and female. And that's why I say Cartesianism or dualism cannot work. You and us. European quarters and native areas. No. If you do that one, then the volume of slum in the city will be higher. Until you sit down and you articulate everything that is there, you synchronize it. If we are talking about Africa of 2063 or 2100, then we are now looking at what do we do? What do we teach a new generation? Continue with the same old Euro-American localism? No. Thank you.
Thank you, Tunji. And these are all fascinating responses. Please, wonderful responses. I'm getting a sense of hybridity from that corner there in terms of thinking together and thinking with each other. And Tunji again doubling down on the need to rehabilitate how we're thinking, our thought patterns to ground it on people, which begs the question about, sometimes I wonder what's the incentive there for people to change their system, a system that works for them already. Why would they want to change it? And this is always the question I've asked for leaders, corrupt leaders as well. Why would they want to change a system that works for them? Let's open it up. Let's get some questions for our presenters. Yes? We'll get a collection of questions.
I want to thank all the speakers. I live in Washington, D.C., and these are very challenging moments, and so to be inspired and removed from the reality of the world right now is most welcome. I thank you all. Yesterday we heard a lot about the notion of listening, and one of the themes that I feel is sort of underlying in all of the presentations is this notion of traditional cultural practices, TCPs. We've alluded to UNESCO recognitions. We see project work that's happening. I was wondering if any of you would speak to the notion of documenting, chronicling, and deploying TCPs in the work that you're doing today.
TCPs, a few more. We can take a few more. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Gary Hildebrand, the chair of Department of Landscape Architecture here at Harvard. I want to thank the panel and also you, Daniel, for moving us towards the political. This is really effective, and it's a good distraction from other political matters. Several of you reminded me of The Great Derangement by Amitav Ghosh, who I think makes the compelling argument that Cartesian thinking abrogated agency only to the human. And colonizers perhaps didn't think of their subjects as human either. And the proposition in his book, The Great Derangement, is that we have to give agency to more than human. And I think we saw a great example of that in the Ellen DeGeneres project yesterday by Mass Design, where endogenous plants and pollinators have agency in the adaptation that is needed to bring biodiversity back. And but you have raised this in such a great way. I'm asking for us to stay political. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was a hand there, and then we'll come to you. We'll take the last one, and then
Thank you. Well, I'm looking at, I'm listening to what you are saying about the results, the long-lasting results of colonialism and how it has impacted Africa. So, for example, like in Kenya and Zimbabwe, you have people who don't even really live in the country, who own vast amounts of land and are not really, it seems, beholden to the people. And so, how do you deal with that type of situation? What are some suggestions that you would have on how to engage these people in being more involved with the issues and the problems in modern day Africa, and how you can get these people's cooperation to make some changes that will benefit the people?
Excellent. So we have 3 questions. Do you have the capacity for a 4th one, or should we stay with it? Okay, let's take the 4th one, and then I'm also noting the questions here, and then we'll turn to our presenters.
Yes, thank you very much. And it won't really be a 4th question. It shall just add on to the others. Okay. And it's just part of a reflection, even as they're answering those questions around coloniality. And for me, the trouble I seem to have, and I'm trying to reconcile with myself, is that the colonialist was very deliberate. But what they were doing in the colonies was not what they were doing back in their own countries. So there's a question for us to really think about when we study and say these are Western ideals. Are we speaking of Western ideals that were for colonialism, or that they were living through at the very same time? And how then do you deal with that? And I think just to Gary's point, he mentioned a subtle point. Did they think of this as human, or did they purposely dehumanize? And that's...
Excellent question. We'll take another round, time permitting. So there's quickly a question around listening, TCP, how it figures in your work. There's a question around the modern human, to think with that. And there's a question around sort of the outsiders within the system, and how we hold these people accountable, those who own something but they're actually not here. And we can think about that even modern human in terms of corporations as well, who are there but not there, and their traces are there. And then there's a comment around perhaps thinking with Tunji's notion of meaning, that in fact we are critiquing something that is not even there. They never really even thought about this space as being a living space. And I'm thinking, Tunji, about Lagos, for example, where the Portuguese didn't even recognize that they were living fishing communities in that place when they came. They just did, nothing existed. So how do we reconcile that? Over to you.
Well, so go for it. Well, again, how do we reconcile them? How was it brought about? He has said it all. He said coloniality is a matter of the theory. It was a deliberate attempt. Only one word. We want to civilize Sub-Saharan Africa through Euro-localism. Finish. And when they were leaving, they left a group of few top civil servants who carry along. In other words, they excluded 90% from the issue till tomorrow, even in other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. How do we reverse? How do we get them? Accommodate the other people via thought process. Sometimes ago, about 2 years ago, a guy came from Pretoria, was asking that he went to Freedom Park, that he has been there twice. He asked one question: why is it not what it used to be when they started? I remember, I know Graham did all possible in Freedom Park. I say values. See, it's about values and norms. If the values and norms are meant for the people, but the white people do not accept it, it must deteriorate. So then there is a need to come for a meeting point between the two. And that is the only way. We cannot continue if we are to solve the problem in the continent of Africa, in which 5–10% own everything, and we are deciding to sue them, and then we now disregard the people who 90%, there will be enough armed robbers on the road.
Yeah.
All right? There will be more murderers on the road. Until you meet the needs of other people, you can't be happy. You cannot enjoy your wealth. If you survive, your children will not survive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And whichever one you want to tackle.
Maybe I'll start with the listening question. I think maybe a way that we've been approaching this, one of our partner universities actually formed originally by a group of nurses. This is Great Lakes University. So they originally found that nurses, they felt, start and end their career sort of in the same space, right? You become the head nurse, but that sort of is the end of that, right? And you are, in a sense, a frontline community worker, and yet your voice and your experiences never get to the policymaking table. And so one of the things that we've learned from this partner and working with them is that the mechanism of working with those folks that are already on the front lines and already having these conversations is often much more meaningful than us trying to sort of go in and try and capture all these traditional cultural practices. The codification and the recording of that, absolutely, this is where we sort of step in and start to work with the teams to figure out how do we start to tell this narrative and publish it in a way that actually makes sense in different form, particularly policy-making spaces, but also academic journals and things of that nature. And so that's the experience we've had with that. To the land ownership question, I think this is particularly hot topic in Zimbabwe, given that we had massive land invasion, is what termed, in the early 2000s, where folks were sort of taking over farms and other properties because they felt that the government hadn't been moving fast enough. We had what was called the Lancaster House Agreement, where the British government and the Zimbabwean government had agreed that over a period of 10 years, from 1980 to 1990, they would work on a mechanism to ensure that land was turned over to the local population, a redistribution of land. Neither side held up their part of the bargain. And so this is where we find ourselves today. And so unpopular opinion in some circles is that conversation does help in some ways to get people to come to the table and think about the consequences of this. But ultimately, I think potentially state mechanisms, incentives such as tax, putting sort of financial pressure on people to either sort of participate in the space or to, make a financial exit. Because I think it becomes difficult when there are long-standing histories and governments on both sides are not sort of moving on this. I think it's a very hot, tenuous topic in Zimbabwe, and I won't deign to touch it in some of the other countries.
It's probably good because we don't have time. But I just want to give Safouan a chance to very quickly respond.
So I think the main matter here is So I think the main issue here is colonized imaginaries. It's a link between all the questions. And I think we should, when we listen, we should also avoid extractivism of ideas. So I think about my question, one of the questions during my thesis was what a socially and politically engaged design looks like when it's one that considers the African perspectives and one that is not into a discourse of pity or a humanitarian design, a design for the other 90%, coming from the other 90%. I really don't like this expression. And I think one answer is to be a questioner, like how to push people to slow down maybe and questions those imaginaries, because I grew up knowing that there is a train we should take as third world development and growth, and we should follow that train, but that train is going into a wall, and I don't know if I want to take that train anymore. And so maybe many answers to the future are in past practices, but it's not about nostalgia. It's about adapting these past practices, maybe. And it's not, like I said, our role as designers is not to speculate for the others, but maybe to enable collective speculation and create those sharing spaces, these spaces. Like, I think about design as a commoning process in itself. So yeah, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to our presenters for such fascinating provocations, interesting material interventions in terms of how we think about landscapes, and perhaps the invitation to not just listen, but also to unlisten as well, and so to keep that tension going. We will take a short break. I think the next panel will turn us towards the pedagogical aspects, but let's take a short break, and then at 11 we'll meet, I believe. 11:15? 11 for the next panel. But thank you so much.